Hello and welcome to End Goals, an LCMS Youth Ministry podcast. I'm host Reverend Mark Kiesland, and I'm with DCE Juliana Schultz. We're here to bring parents, church workers, and lay leaders discussions and resources to help your youth ministry meet its end goal, which is young people who are disciples of Jesus Christ for life. Today, we're going to talk about how to use games effectively in youth ministry.
This probably doesn't come as a surprise to many of our listeners, but teenagers do not sit still very well. They tend to need action and interaction if we're going to keep their attention for very long. But we know that more and more teens are spending time in front of screens, in front of their phones, and they're also filling schedules with all kind of very structured activities, homework, work, and more. And they have a less time, I think, to have that free, creative, interactive play than maybe we saw from generations before.
Absolutely. And playing games is something almost every youth ministry does during the meeting times or maybe as part of their programming. In fact, maybe outside of PE class, youth ministry might be the most common place young people are playing games like, dodgeball, capture the flag, many, many more of those types of games that maybe normally would have been part of maybe a school curriculum in the past.
Yeah. Mark, do you have any games that you played in youth ministry that you remember fondly?
Well, I had to have Capture the Flag in my statement because Capture the Flag in the wilds of Montana was definitely one of my favorite youth ministry games. Absolutely. Community building, competitiveness, being outdoors. It was definitely one of my favorites.
See, I remember Capture the Flag, but I remember it because I was constantly lost. I mean, if you've met me, I have no sense of direction. And so I was constantly like, I don't know.
Capture the Flag became Find Juliana.
The whole game was just like, I don't know what's happening and I don't know where I am.
So sorry to bring up that moment for you, that as you compose yourself here a little bit, maybe what was one of your favorite games that you played in youth ministry?
See, I was much more of a sit-down board game, right?
Okay.
Like I would do like that kind of game. But I often love, like, we would play various games. One that I would play with my youth group that I loved playing was, people call it different things, but you turn out all the lights and there's different pieces to a flashlight that are hidden all over the room. And you're trying to get away from the person who's it and you're put the flashlight together. Things like that. Ones that there was a little less, you could do it in a gym.
Yes.
Right? There was no chance of me getting lost in the woods. It's usually a little bit easier for me. But we know that games in youth ministry do more than burn off energy. When they're done well, they can help teach and build relationships and help connect young people to God's word. Using games well takes some intentionality. So joining us today are three people who know how to use games well in youth ministry.
With 3 decades of service in the LCMS, Signe White is a seasoned ministry leader whose passion for the outdoors and leadership development has shaped her role as executive director of Camp Perkins, a thriving outdoors ministry and conference center. Signe blends her passion for nature and outdoor play with her focus on fostering and empowering new leaders through visionary guidance and strategic leadership, both within the organization and the wider church community.
Ellie Lutz has been a camp professional for 13 years and has also served as a church youth leader for 2 years. She's led programs at camp ministries in Wisconsin, Idaho, and her current location, Lakeview Ministries in Southern Indiana. Her camp nickname is Frisbee because, so she tells the kids, she's fun to play with and good at spinning in circles.
Keith Peters served in various Christian camp ministries and in a parish ministry prior to joining Luther Haven's team as the director of summer and youth ministry in 2021. During summers at Camp Luther Homa throughout high school and college, he was privileged to learn game leading and has been training others to lead games for 2 decades. His other interests include teaching adult Bible study classes, logging miles either by running or cycling, and drinking. Oh, I love it. You're going to love it. Drinking good coffee.
It's a must.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, Ellie and Signe, thanks for joining us today. We got to hear about all three of you briefly in the intro, but could you tell us something more about your vocations, your roles in youth ministry, and other things that bring you joy?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll kick us off. Frisbee here. So one thing that truly brings me joy is working at camp. I originally went to school to be a teacher, and right before I student taught, spent my very first summer as a counselor at a summer camp and said, wow, this is a lot of fun. It's a lot like school, but there's no homework and pretty much everything you're asking the kids to do, they want to do. Yeah. And haven't looked back since. So it's been a great journey and really feel blessed to be able to serve in camp ministry.
Yeah, I'm happy to go next. This is Keith, or I guess we can use camp names since we're doing camp stuff. My camp name's Cheesy, so a lot of people will refer to me that way. like to tell people it's because I smile a lot and I know how to spin in circles. Not really. I just had to play off of Frisbee's reference. So I'm married to my wife, Jana. She's a deaconess in the Lutheran Church, the LCMS, and we're about to celebrate 16 years on Friday, which is great.
Awesome.
Also have 3 daughters, which I call my youth ministry full time. My oldest daughter is about to graduate from high school. My middle daughter is in 8th grade, about to go into high school. And my youngest daughter is in 3rd grade, but doing 4th grade work. So that's my crew. And then for me, I would say some of the other just vocations outside of family would be that at camp, I get to lead a lot of programmatic activities like confirmation retreats. I'm on the committee for the Indiana District Junior High Youth Rally, which Ellie's also a part of. Frisbee. And then also I get to visit and lead about 40 chapels at various Christian schools in our area during the spring. So a lot of connections, Northern Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, and those kind of areas. And then finally, one of the things I get to lead is high school winter retreats where I select certain leaders among peers of high schoolers and they help develop and come up with a retreat to lead for their peers for a weekend. So that's probably one of the coolest things that I've got to be involved in with youth ministry so far right now.
Well, this is Signe. I do have a camp name, but nobody uses it. So probably because my own name is actually unique. So when I introduce myself at camp and I say I'm Signe, they say, "Oh, what's your actual name?" Signe. No, not your camp name. What's your actual name? So then I just use my Starbucks name, which is, that. I'll just go with that. So what brings me joy, honestly, is bringing people joy. I just love to see people release their tension when they get up to camp and they get to just relax and play. And we bring the food and we clean up the food and they just get to be themselves and be a family. And so that brings me a lot of joy in my vocation and just raising up or getting to be a part of people's journey into leadership. So even just here, we have Ellie and Keith, and I got to be with them along their journey as well. Many people played a part in their journey, but I got to be a part of that at Wall Camp and out here at Camp Perkins. So that is just a blessing to me and brings me joy. Also, I just really need sunshine. So, and mountains, that brings me joy. So even just getting outside a little bit every day, even in the winter, is really important for me, and just loving that, being in creation a little bit.
Well, Camp Perkins in Idaho definitely gives you gorgeous mountains, wonderful snow, great opportunities to be outside. That is for sure. Well, one of the things that we love to hear from youth ministry leaders is about their junior and senior high school years. Can you maybe share of a moment how Jesus used that to bring you closer to his church or to him himself through people or through activities, things that took place that made an impact in your life?
Yeah, maybe we can go in a little reverse order if you want. For me, I had a unique journey of faith in that I wasn't raised in a traditional church setting, didn't have a youth group, never went to camp as a kid, didn't experience any of those things, but was raised by a strong Christian family. And so spent time in the Word in that way. And my senior year of high school, things really kind of solidified for me. And we were asked in the first day of class, in my literature class, to give examples of mythology. And one of the students listed the Bible was mythology. And that was a pivotal moment for me to make that choice of, do I stand up for my faith? Do I speak out for my faith? Or do I just let this moment pass by? And I did choose to share what I believe about the Bible and that it's true and that it's not just mythology. And that really ruffled some feathers. That was interesting. I did get voted most likely to become a nun because I spoke out about my faith. I'm not Catholic, so that was a challenge to fulfill my destiny in my senior high yearbook. But that was just a really important moment for me. So then as I encountered moments throughout high school, college, then looking for ways that I could continue to speak out about my faith and have opportunities to share share that with people. So that was a very pivotal moment for me. And there are definitely people along that way, the teachers who iron sharpens iron, right? So they gave me an opportunity to think apologetically about my faith, and then friends who came alongside me and were willing to say what they believed as well. So that was important for me.
Since we're going backwards, this is Keith. I'll go. Well, I grew up in Oklahoma. Obviously, Camp Luther was my stomping grounds for so long. Went to a very small public rural school. Graduated with 27 students. My entire school, K through 12, was about 300 students, and I went there K through 12. Ironically, despite the fact of spending all this time with all these people for most of my life and growing up in a town of about 1,000 people, I never really connected with people at school outside of school. Like, we were fine with each other, but I didn't really have interest in what they were interested in. Just didn't line up. And then found myself in 8th grade. My parents got divorced and made this very profound decision, despite my parents' decision on how things were going to work. Originally, it was like, you're going to all live, you and your sister will live with your dad. Mom's going to move out to my great grandma's house or whatever. And so I ended up saying, well, what if I lived with mom and I could attend church with dad? And at the time we were attending the Church of Christ, which, if you don't know anything about the Church of Christ, grew up in there up until 8th grade, basically. And it's all a cappella singing, no instruments. And we were a tiny church, about 20 people, and my family made up the majority of the members. And so there was no Sunday school. There was no youth ministry. I got the King James Bible the same as all the adults did for that experience. And so when my parents divorced, my dad had grown up Lutheran, so he went back to the Lutheran church. So that's how I ended up in the Lutheran church, was through my parents' divorce. And then, ironically, we had still attended and gone to family camp at Camp Luther growing up. Despite not attending a Lutheran church, it was a thing that my dad's family had done and continued to do it on Labor Day weekends. And so I was at Luther on that Labor Day when my mom was moving out, and we were at family camp, ironically. And I remember walking back from the outdoor chapel as this middle schooler, talking with John Bush, who's still the director there. And it was just this pivotal moment of, probably the only person I ever brought it up to, even just like, hey, yeah, this is going on. And I just remember him, talking with me, not really giving me any answers or anything, but it was just pretty profound moment for me that still stuck out, that I was willing to come up to this guy who I'd seen randomly year after year and have this conversation. So yeah, I'd say that was a pretty pivotal moment for me. And then people recommended I do the counselor and training program, and the rest is history. I was at Luther for so long, and then in outdoors ministry and parish ministry since then.
Yeah, I think for me, when I was thinking about like key moments as a middle schooler and as a high schooler, one that came to me, so kind of a little background. So I love games and sports and competition. As a introvert, it is a place where socially I feel most myself, because there's a clear goal and you can inspire people to do things. And so I love games. And so growing up, I was a huge basketball player, started playing in like kindergarten and played all through high school. So it was on like the varsity team in high school. And my sophomore year, we were doing tryouts at the start of the basketball season and made a cut to try to get open and felt my knee go, "Whoop," and was like, well, that doesn't seem good. And gutted it out through the rest of practice, but then went into the doctor afterwards. It swelled up a ton and found out I had torn my ACL, which is about a 6-month recovery period. You got to get surgery, all that good stuff. So went through surgery, did the 6 months of rehab, got really friendly with the people at the physical therapist's office, and then was back in action in time for summer ball. So we were playing at a tournament in the summer, and it was my third game back, and was doing a play and felt the same thing happen in my left knee, so in the other knee, and immediately knew what I had done, like hobbled over the bench, sat down, just did the classic, put a towel over my head and just started crying, because I knew I was facing another half a year of not being able to play, not being able to compete, and having to go through the rehab. And I bring that up as a key moment because having that basically full year of not being able to do sports, not being able to play and compete really made me evaluate how big of a role sports was playing in like my identity and in how I viewed myself and in who I was, and putting that up against who I knew I was as a Christian and as a follower of Jesus. And so it was really kind of a rubber hits the road moment of, are sports your identity, or can, even in the midst of having them taken away, can you continue to follow Jesus and be a Christian and have that be your identity? And so it was a really good, really hard, but really good gut check of who I was as a complete person and not just what came most naturally to me or what I enjoyed the most. So that's what came to mind when I thought of that question.
Well, thanks guys so much for sharing that. We just appreciate the many and various ways God works to draw people closer to him and to the church. So almost every youth ministry I know includes playing games as some part of their programming. What are some benefits that you guys know that of including games and play in particular in youth ministry?
I can take a shot.
Yeah.
I would say games are pretty critical to development in general. So like groups, like youth groups, they grow together and develop similar to how people develop individually. So games are the forming stage for youth groups before people can learn to trust each other and go deeper with things they're going to play and learn how to be safe together in those kind of ways. So games allow us to see how others value people. I'd say that, if you're playing a tag game and someone's tagging people by pushing them down, you can already establish that you need to work on establishing appropriate and safe boundaries and things like that as a group. So I would say even sequencing your games is important. So there's a lot that I would say in terms of incorporating them that youth groups can do that's valuable.
I think this to me is just like one of the easiest questions in the world to answer. One of my firm beliefs is the world would be a better place if we all played more. Adults, kids, everywhere in between. And one of the things I love about my job is I get to invite adults into a place where I tell them it's okay to play, like it's okay to have fun and be goofy and silly. But looking at youth ministry specifically and leading games within that, sometimes we view games as like this extra or like this bonus or this thing that you use to like get the kids in the door and then you can do the real stuff. But I would encourage youth leaders out there to realize that games are part of that real stuff. And when you invite people to play, you're inviting them into relationship and into a chance to connect and learn how to trust each other and laugh with each other. And that's a huge part of what we do as ministry leaders, is be able to have that incarnational ministry of where we're laughing and playing and living alongside people. And so games can lead to other things. They can, when people have a chance to be silly, they also can then have a chance to open up in other ways. But games are not just a means to the end. They're a place where a lot of ministry things happen, because when people play, it opens them up in ways that sometimes is really hard to make happen if you're just talking or if you're teaching or if you're doing other things. And so that's one of the reasons that I love games and why they're so important when it comes to ministry.
Games can be a pretty broad category. It can include sports, competitive and cooperative games, games may be played individually or as a team. How do you choose what games to play and when you consider that either in the camp context or also when you've been doing congregational ministry?
I'm a big proponent for knowing your audience and choosing to sequence games intentionally. So this can be, anything from like a short session of like mini non-competitive games in like a challenge course context where you're making a lot of observations about the students and stuff like that. Or it could even be, at camp, we'll have hundreds of campers. At Luther Haven, we'll have first graders and eighth graders, and we're trying to play a game. So it's knowing what game to play with 100 campers on the first night of camp that everybody can play and have fun with, to what's going to work better on the last night of camp to play with everyone at that stage. So I would definitely say that choosing games wisely is very important, and sequencing them so that you can kind of establish what they're ready for and what you might want to do before playing maybe like a more intense game with a lot of competition so that you can make sure that everybody's going to play and be safe and stuff like that?
I would say choosing good games comes down to two things. I think first, like Keith mentioned, it's knowing your goal and knowing your group. So if you've got a group that is the board game type and you put them into a super intense competitive game, they're not going to have a good time, or they're going to take that game in a whole new direction that you never saw coming. Whereas if you have a group of, freshman boys, they're probably going to want a little bit more of that competitive action. So knowing your group and what their vibe is helps you choose some games. I think the other big thing, though, when it comes to games is you could really do just about any game. It comes down to how you're leading it and how you're facilitating it, because you can tweak games and switch them up, and games are really flexible. And so a lot of that comes down on you as a leader. And are you watching out for everybody in your group? Are you stepping in when there are things happening that maybe somebody isn't having as good a time in the game? And are you adjusting to help them be able to have more fun? Are you watching out for everybody's safety, physical, emotional, spiritual, all of that? Are you dragging the game out until the bitter end till the kids are super sick of it? Or are you ending it on a high, and switching tracks, keeping things moving? Always want to end on a high. So yeah, I think first it comes down to knowing your group, but second, it comes down to just looking at things that you as a leader can do to lead the game well, regardless of what it is that you're playing.
Yeah, because I think part of sometimes from a kid's perspective, the games we play or the games that we choose seems sort of random and like they're not necessarily reading into all of the deliberation that goes into like, hey, if this group is just meeting each other, a cooperative game is more helpful than a competitive game. Or hey, if we're in a space where we're just getting to know each other, I'm not going to pick a game where I'm going to need you to touch all sorts of stranger people that you just met. Right. So there's a lot of different little components that can go into choosing, like you said, all of that, Ellie, like thinking about your group and then your goal. Like, what is the thing you want to get out of that game? We also know that games can help teach as well, right? I think a lot of us have used that to teach, whether that's to teach a concept or to teach about scripture and who God is. What are some keys to help using games as a teaching tool, making that effective?
Well, this speaks to the teacher in me. Like I mentioned, I did get my degree in secondary education history. So shout out to all those history teachers out there. And I think what this question really gets at is the idea of experiential learning, that you can make learning a lot more powerful if you're kind of into some sort of hands-on, active, you're doing something with then just kind of the bare bones or the facts or the information that you're throwing kids' ways. And so speaking from experience, I can say that even if you have a really good connection between the game and the lesson, usually kids won't remember it, a year or two down the line. So, you got to accept that. But it is great to lead into the lesson and get the kids kind of amped up. And what I've found is when you do have a more tenuous connection between the game you're playing and then the lesson that you're trying to teach, you just have to double down and go hard for it. And even if it's a little cheesy there you go, shout out cheesy. Even if it's a little cheesy or jokey, if you kind of sell it, if you commit to it, the kids will respect that, even if they're rolling their eyes at like this lame transition that you just did.
Yeah, you can front load an activity or a game with some sort of metaphor that connects directly into the lesson. That would be one thing. You don't have to make it overcomplicated. I mean, I think the game many youth leaders have played is the lava game, right? And so there's obstacles and you have to get across it, and maybe blindfold people and then they don't hit the obstacle. And that can be like the traps of sin in our life. And so you can front load it and hope they get there and make that connection in your debriefing. I was listening to your podcast, I think, with Jeremy Becker, and he was talking about just the great importance of debriefing that experience. And I think that's a key part of it is the debrief, is asking, so what happened? What about that? What now? Where do you want to go with that? What is that equipping you with? What is that teach you about your faith? Where did you see God involved in that? Or where do you see God in your life in the lava pit? So you can do all those things. Sometimes they just go in a whole different direction. So that's the other part of it, is just being prepared to pivot with the kids where they're going. If they get a completely different connection to Christ, creation, their faith, I mean, just go with it. Lean in, double down on that if you need to. It's okay. That's what I would say about those experiential learnings. Have that metaphor, but be prepared to pivot with the kids when they might go in a different direction.
Yeah, one game that came to mind is this border. Sometimes when we talk about games and connections, you can get borderline initiatives versus games, where it's you lose some of the play and now you've kind of created a group goal out of some of these things. One of those for me is this game called Group Juggle, where you have everyone in a circle and you're tossing items across the circle and you create a pattern and you continue to go in the same pattern, trying to get as many items as you can through all different kinds of items, all different kinds of things that you can do with it, right? But one of the cool analogies that comes out of that is things like the body of Christ, or just seeing the necessity of each individual and how one person would never be able to do all of this on their own. But together, look at how many things we were able to juggle. And then also things like choosing really hard things to throw and juggle, like a Frisbee, for instance, is a really hard thing to do in group juggle, by the way, or versus like a tennis ball, which tends to be really easy. And then talking about what kinds of things in life are harder to juggle and what kinds of things in life are easier. And why does God give us sometimes harder things? Why does he pass us those? And there's all kinds of great ways that I think can make some connections beyond the game itself to like, yeah, those feelings that I felt in that game, sometimes I feel about this. And those connections maybe can become a little bit more isomorphic that way for youth as well.
It's great that active learning can be such a thing too. I think that does help make connections when they either maybe play that game down the line or a similar game, and be able to see how those lessons interact with other aspects of their life, or again, as that opportunity to play comes up again. One of the things too that I love about games, along with being able to teach, and sometimes this is part of the teaching, is the community that gets built, whether it's youth to other adults. What are some things that you think about when you consider using games to build community amongst other people?
One of the things I want to see in a game is skilled versus unskilled. So when you talk about ultimate Frisbee, there's a lot of skill involved in that. Running, being able to stay upright while you're running, those are all skills that I may or may not possess. But so to create an unskilled, to level that playing field, like we do ultimate object instead of ultimate Frisbee. So maybe you're throwing a screaming rubber chicken, things like that. But it allows people to when you break down that skill, and it's okay to be competitive, and at the same time, it invites people in when it's not requiring a specific set of skills. It's not that those games are bad, but when I'm trying to build community, I want to make sure that we level that playing field as much as possible in that. I also love to invite adults. It's so frequent when we have groups come up to camp, the chaperones will want to kind of sit on the outside and watch the game. And so I try to make sure I always play the game and then invite the adults into the game. Because when the kids see the adults laugh, play, make mistakes, get up, do it again, it's so great for breaking down those barriers in that community.
Yeah, that was something that I was going to mention, Signe, is just the power of the adult leaders playing with the kids and the youth. I think we all can think of a time growing up when like our favorite uncle or, this older adult that we thought was cool played a game with us, and how much more special that made it. And the same is true in youth ministry. When you're getting down in the dirt with the kids and playing with them, that speaks volumes that you might be trying to communicate in other ways. But that simple act of coming and playing with them and kind of being vulnerable in that way. Because as adults, we can sometimes feel awkward, or we can feel a little silly doing it. But doing that speaks volumes to kids that you are somebody who's coming alongside them and being with them, whether it's playing a game or it's living out their faith.
And speaking of those adults, one thing I also like to encourage is the caring restraint, especially in the debriefing. Sometimes the adults like to give all the answers that they saw in those connections. But the other caring restraint is sometimes there's high schoolers playing with middle schoolers, things like that. I'll never forget, there was a a program leader who came in and he was so excited. And he's like, I scored 5 goals playing soccer today. And I was like, who are you playing with? Well, 3rd graders. Okay. Awesome. I mean, maybe it's not such a great victory when you can defeat 3rd graders as a college student. But I mean, for me, it would still be a victory because I have 0 skill at soccer, but it was just really funny. So that idea of using some care and restraint, competition isn't bad. It can help community grow, and conflict isn't even bad. It can help community grow. At the same time, we want to make sure that our physicality or our skills aren't overshadowing the purpose of the game that we're playing.
Yeah. And I think that's part of, as you guys talked about earlier, knowing your group, right? Knowing what skills are in your group and where a game might mean that you have 1 or 2 people who are scoring all the goals because they're playing against people who don't know how to play, right? And how that impacts us, emotionally as we're building that community, or versus like how when you even the playing field with the screaming chicken, then suddenly you're going to build a whole different kind of community. And I really think that gets to this idea. And I've always been like trying to be, as somebody who's not like a super athletic person, super conscientious of as I design games, which is a game well designed, well played, well ruled can be incredible in terms of teaching and building community. But a game that goes sideways can happen for a lot of reasons. Or the wrong game at the wrong time with the wrong people can do some harm in some cases. I can think of a few times where I've played games and been like, oh, this is counterproductive, right? Whether I'm the one that's playing or whether I've been the one who's leading. So what are some mistakes youth leaders might want to avoid when planning and playing games?
I think we've mentioned a few of them that I can just reiterate, which is, not playing the game would be a big mistake yourself as a leader. So that's a huge one. Make sure you play the game, I would say. And then when you're introducing a new game, I think it's always good to bring in some backup. So what I mean by that is have some first followers who are there really excited to play the game so that that's kind of contagious. And that could be as simple as having someone there as a co-leader. Doesn't necessarily have to be one of the youth, but someone who's also excited to play the game so that you've got some backup that way. Covering safety is usually overlooked in games. Like you're just so ready to start playing and then bam, before you even start, someone runs into each other and you're done. So making sure that you cover any important safety. Don't think things are obvious. Cover them anyway. Always cover boundaries. They'll run out the door. You got to just tell them what you got to be pretty specific, but along with that, rules should be as brief as possible. So you're really up against this catch-22. You don't want to spend forever talking about the game and playing it for a short amount of time. I like to say, explain the game in 3 different ways. Don't just tell them. You got to say it, show it, slow-mo it, and then practice rounds to really get the feel of it so that there aren't a whole lot of questions like, I didn't hear a word you said. What are we doing? And we've mentioned stop the game at its peak. Yeah, don't kill the thing. Don't, we don't want a dead game. You want to be able to bring games back in a pinch and have excitement about playing a game in the future still when you're in need of it. And then Signe mentioned caring restraint. I think that's a big one too. Make sure you as leaders have that caring restraint as well.
I think another thing or two that comes to mind. First, an encouragement for youth leaders out there. Things will go wrong in your games, and that's okay. The key thing is when things do go wrong is to respond to it. Kids can have like a negative experience or a bad experience if you take the time to talk about it with them and kind of address it, bring it out in the open instead of, kind of trying to ignore it or shove it off to the side. So when things do go wrong or you see like, oh, I set up a super athletic game and there's a kid or two that they are not athletes at all and they're starting to feel bad because they're, not able to do this. You can pivot. You can address that. You can, talk about it and move from there. Don't feel like you have to cover up the bad things that are going on. You can use it as a teaching point, like we were talking about earlier. You can process it. You can debrief it. I think the other big thing that I'd mention is one of the big things at camps is this idea of challenge by choice. So this idea that you always have agency to kind of choose your involvement level. And with kids, it can be a little bit of a balance because a lot of times kids will need kind of coaxing and, hey, come on, jump in here. It's going to be fun. But there is great power in and great safety when kids know that they have the ability to be like, no, I really don't want to do that. And so that's huge in games. Even if you think it's something silly, it creates a very safe atmosphere when you let everybody know that they, push comes to shove, they have the ability to decide not to participate in something because they're just not feeling it for whatever reason.
All important things to remember and think about those parts where a youth leader is kind of thinking through both choosing the right game as well as kind of maybe some of those things to be thinking through, especially definitely, I think speaking the rules well, kind of putting that framework. I know I was one that, especially in those competitive games, would be easy to push the boundaries a little bit. And so having, again, an adult that thinks that through and is prepared for that and be able to, again, help me understand in that context of that game where my gifts were to be used and how to be a good team player and all of that was always very important for me. So those, again, small lessons that can be learned, large lessons can be learned when, again, adult leaders use that well and use that as an opportunity to, again, teach and also build community. So one thing that we love about camp ministry, generally, you all are on the forefront of bringing in new, exciting games to teach and build community. Either what are some of your favorite new ones, or maybe what are some of the ones at your camp that are long-standing favorites that have maybe helped you reach some of these goals that you have for a week at camp or for a retreat, whether those are things that come together, again, that have been a part of your life that you've been putting together, or maybe things that have become camp favorites over the years in your location.
Well, I'm a big fan of non-competitive games myself, games that aren't like, based on like a winner or a loser. They're just fun for fun's sake. And you don't even realize why this is fun, but you're doing it. So one of those games for me, I change the name almost every time I play this, but I'll just call it Mutation. And so the way it works is the reason I like this game is because the people playing it actually create the game as you go. So there's investment right away of how the game works and people get to choose stuff and whatever. And so it starts off, usually I'll pick the first one, like everyone starts as a chicken and a chicken looks like this. And I'll flap my wings and get down and kind of squawk and go, I'm a chicken, I'm a chicken, I'm a chicken. And that's what a chicken says. And so the way it works is to mutate beyond a chicken. You have to find another chicken and everyone starts as a chicken and you go up to a chicken and you play rock, paper, scissors. Whoever wins rock, paper, scissors mutates into the next thing, which is, and then they get to respond with something, a flea. Okay, a flea. What does a flea look like? And then they got to show me. And okay, what does a flea sound like? No, it can't be that. You can't do I'm a flea. You got to pick something else. Really get them to think out of the box. And by the end of it, you're like T-Rexes or, cowboys or space shuttle. Like they just come up with the craziest, some, YouTube phenom. I don't know, but they'll come up with different things until you get to the final one and you pick a few of them and you practice the whole time. And then you play the game. And once you hit the peak of whatever the peak is, Miley Cyrus or whatever they choose, then the Miley Cyruses will go off to the side and everyone else is still like trying to mutate and go for it. It's just funny, it's not competitive. The rock, paper, scissors thing is just, you can't like go home and practice this kind of stuff and get good at it. So that's what I love about it. It's just a lot of fun. People just enjoy watching each other. And if someone walks up into the midst of this chaos happening, they're having a good time too, right? Because they're like, what is happening right here? So those are the kind of games that I really like.
And to do a complete 180, let's talk about a game called Death Ball.
You're talking my language now.
Death Ball.
Trees. I think there's just a couple of different kinds of game people.
So Death Ball is a great game for it's pretty flexible in terms of numbers. It's a great game to play indoors. So if you are used to being outside and you got poor weather, it's a great game to be inside with. So to play, you need to set up a circle of chairs and you want a little bit of space in between each chair. You need one less chair than there are people playing. One person is going to be in the middle And then the people sitting in the chairs will have a ball that they are passing around. The person in the middle is able to get out of the middle by stealing the ball. Now, the reason that it's called death ball is you can choose as a group to nicely play keep away and pass the ball around. But a key rule for the game is that the only people who can go after the ball are the person who touched it last and the person in the middle. So if the ball gets loose, the only people that can go after it are the person that touched it last and the person in the middle. And so perhaps temptation seizes you, and instead of nicely tossing it across the circle to your friend, you decide you're going to slam it against them so the ball goes ricocheting and they have to try to track it down before the person in the middle, or else now they're in the middle. And that is how you play death ball. It's a great game.
I don't even know how to top all that. That's amazing. I would say one of my favorite games, it's not new, is just red fish, blue fish, one fish, two fish. And I love it because you can play it with third graders. So it's kind of like red light, green light, sort of turn around, pick something off the ground. And you can use it anywhere. You could be in a line. You could be waiting for something at a store. I mean, you could just play it anywhere, honestly. So the goal is to retrieve the object from the person who's it while they turn around and go back and forth. What I love about it is it's almost impossible to do without working together. But it takes, especially younger kids, takes them a while to figure that out. But then eventually they start talking to each other and they start figuring out a plan. And it's really great for a group that just can't seem to get along on that first day of camp or at the beginning of the year with youth group. If you're trying to figure out how to get them to talk to each other, that's a great method. And then you rotate who is the person who is doing the turning around. It's a great game. And it's really fun to watch adults try to do it.
That's awesome. I just played a new game for the first time called Happy Salmon. I'm going to throw mine in there. It's a card game and everybody has a different color of cards. And it's so simple because you have your cards stand up. You're trying to get rid of your cards. You get rid of them by finding a partner that has the same card and doing the action. So it's a fist bump. It's a switching sides. And so it happens really fast. We played it with little kids and big kids together. And it was fast. It was easy. It didn't have a lot of rules. So lots of different, there's a ton of different games. You just have to Google them out there of different kinds of games. We just want to give you guys just a quick minute to talk maybe just beyond the games and talk about, you guys all serve in camp ministry. So we don't want to just slide past that. You guys have talked about how maybe already you've talked a little bit about how you use games at camp, but maybe share with us anything you would add to how you use games and what you guys do, but also what's the impact you see camps having on young people.
Well, I would say that, games are usually one of the first things we do with the group we're leading at camps, whether it's campers with their counselors or programmed group that we're leading. Even honestly, the first official thing that I do with our summer staff training when they arrive, before we do any kind of formal thing, we play games. I truly believe that it's one of the reasons that camps have a lasting impact on people's spiritual walk. I mean, they form these long, often lifelong relationships with others, and these moments of fun and play are the pivotal thing of these relational equity that they build. You look ridiculous, and that silliness means getting vulnerable, Frisbee had said, especially in front of other people, and laughing at yourself. These are things that are so important. And even competition in games that reminds us that we can't win them all sometimes, and our worth isn't wrapped up in being the fastest or the strongest or the most talented. And sometimes the things we teach are how to lose gracefully, and that, these aren't things that we promote as the highest value of anything. And that comes from someone who's pretty competitive myself. So, I definitely learned that lesson often, but those would be some of the things I think camps do very well.
When I think about playing games with other people, one of the things we talk with our summer staff about is that we're a place sharing ministry, that their job is not to teach kids everything that they need to know about Jesus or about the Bible. It is not to be the one that leads them to Christ, but rather it's to share a place with them. And so when we play games, we know that that is a place where Jesus is present because he is present in the connection between us and other people, that when we meet other people, we do it through Christ. And so that's a very deep level to think about games, but it's so incredible to see at camps how groups of people can come together, not knowing anybody, and by the end of the week, leave with, like Keith talked about, these lifelong friends and the impact that it has on their faith and on their spiritual walk as a result.
I only got to work at camp one summer, and I know one of my favorite things to watch over the extension of the week is we always had games at night, and to watch from night one, that anxiousness, that meeting new people, that unsure what to do. And by the fourth night or the fifth night, people just excited to see each other again, to play those games, to have that fun. I remember that was always one of my favorite things at camp, to watch that group mold and get to know each other, become friends. And it was so awesome to see. So love to see how games were one of those tools that were used to do that at camps.
Well, we're so grateful that you guys joined us today and shared your expertise with us. And we'll be praying for you as you get ready for your big summer season at your camps.
Thanks so much.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
It's such a great conversation. I know we brought in camp folks to talk about games, which, some of you might be listening to this and say like, well, I could do a lot of games too if I had a large ball field or, some sort of indoor facility that maybe some congregations are not going to have for that too. But yet, nonetheless, we can still see how games can be a great way to, I think, break down walls between adults and youth to youth. Be able to learn from one another, be able to learn about each other. I think it's just some great things that I know I was blessed to have games being played in my youth ministry growing up, and in my school too. Just in educational opportunities as well.
Yeah. And I find that games are a great way. Like, I can talk about how I want you to treat each other,
right,
and how we collectively treat each other as in youth ministry, and talk about warmth, challenge, and grace and those kinds of things until I'm blue in the face. But games are this great way for us to be able to set some of those ways that we talk to each other, some of the ways that we treat each other, the ways that we apologize when we make mistakes. All of those things are things that you do actively in games that can help set this environment in your youth ministry that helps people. It's not just to know each other, but to know people are safe. To know that I made a mistake in that game that maybe cost my team the win, but how they respond to me or how we talk to or about each other really tells me that I'm in a welcoming space. I'm in a space where people want me to be.
And I appreciate what was said about adults getting involved in that too. It's like in those appropriate places for that to happen. For again, that can build those relationships between adult and youth, and just be able to have some of those, I guess, level playing fields. And some games with young people, the playing field may not be that level in terms of just their ability and energy to do things, but yet be able to make that connection with them, or to when maybe you're younger and we're playing those games and love that competitive side of it, or love those things that you're able to learn through that too, to be able to create that bond and connection between an adult and a young person as well.
Yeah. I really love the idea of knowing your group, which means knowing who's an introvert, who's an extrovert, who's the communicator, and then how do I play with that to help bring out something different in this group or in this game, but also knowing their skill level, right? So one of my favorite things is, okay, we have a speed game, but I'm going to take an arm, tell one of our more athletic kids that they can't use an arm, or have to, have some sort of disadvantage that makes it so that they have to be encouraging. They have to be focused on the other players and not just depend on one player. Those kinds of things, ways that you can manipulate the rules for your game that makes it so that you have that even playing field where everyone is contributing. And then knowing your goal, right? Knowing what's the outcome I want from this game. Am I wanting them to get a bunch of energy out? Maybe then I'm picking this really high energy, competitive game. Maybe I'm wanting them to communicate with each other better. And so then I'm going to pick this cooperative game where everybody is doing this. If I'm, depending on what I want that outcome to be, is going to change which games I choose and what order I choose them in.
Yeah, I remember, like, as a young person, playing one who did play sports and was really competitive, that even playing those kind of games within a ministry context helped me be a better, in my vocation as athlete, help me be a better teammate, to understand like, oh, okay, I can behave the way I do at in a church situation, do that on my team as well and be able to be that gracious teammate, looking at what's better for my teammate, seeing the largeness of what's our goal as a team to do that like helped, and they complemented each other too, as I was a young Christian learning that in that vocation too. So like a lot of those great things within our everyday vocations get to play out through those lessons that we can learn through games, those interactions with people that games sometimes force us to do.
Yeah, there's a lot to this. And like I said, I think there's a lot more to this that we could have gone on for a while.
Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting thing too. I mean, I think there's more and more conversation about, with maybe like you said in the front end, about more screen time. Maybe our young people are not playing these games like they used to growing up, or maybe even what we did growing up. And so church can be this place to, again, maybe have those more connections, physical connections, ways that can maybe be pretty unique to even some of your high school students that have not had that maybe growing up in other contexts.
A way to disconnect, a way to be together, a way to be creative. Nobody's checking their phone when they're in the middle of this. Like we're all cooperative. And even as we talked about with Jeremy a couple episodes ago, we have a common goal together that how that brings us together, the powerful ways that you can use this. So a small thing that seems like this thing you just add on at the end now becomes this huge long episode. But we hope that it's encouraging for you. So a couple of things to think about as we go forward. What kind of goals do you have for the games you play in youth ministry?
How can you use games to create a unique and effective learning environment for young people?
And finally, how can you encourage adults and youth to step out of their comfort zones and play more together? We will continue to keep you in our prayers as you play, as you lead others to play, as a part of teaching and building community in your youth ministry.
End Goals Podcast is a production of LCMS Youth Ministry and KFUO Radio. To find out more about LCMS Youth Ministry or to find links to resources mentioned, go to kfuo.org/youthministry. Thank you for listening and caring for the young people of our church.